right, so the recorder's on. So hi, everybody. This is Dana Brigman of the Canine Coach. I have with me Sandra Dobel. Did I pronounce that right? I always misspell it.
Dolbell.
Dolbell.
Yeah, Dolbell.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Sandra is one of my clients with her two dogs, Kalie and Bumble. We met a couple of years ago, but it took her a little while to dive into this raw feeding thing. So she's going to tell us a little bit about the history of her two dogs and what led her down the path of feeding a raw food and choosing the Volhard diet. So take it away, Sandra.
So Kalie, I rescued Kalie when she was quite young. She was probably about a year old. And initially, she had no health issues, very healthy. She's a little lab mix, probably about 56 pounds. Really didn't have any significant issues. And probably about the age of 3.5, I started noticing these like black markings in her ears, some kind of like black markings on her stomach. And I was kind of like, that's weird. And initially thought it was dirt. So, I'm rubbing it, I'm cleaning her ears, and it's not coming off. And I kind of started doing some history, and people were like, well, that sounds like it's inflammatory response. And I was like, that's weird because she's not itchy. Just as I said that,
was it just discoloration or her?
Yeah, discoloration.
Changing colors?
Black discoloration. Yeah. And, it almost looks like two marker lines on like the creases of her ears. It was just really strange. And she's never had ear infections, never had any itching, nothing. And then it almost felt like within 2 weeks, the feet started. She started licking her back feet, licking them, getting up at night, licking them. And then she'd start doing the 3-legged scratch.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to check her belly. I thought maybe she loved rolling around in the grass. And then we had ryegrass and I guess like you would call, I don't even know what kind of grass we had, but we would put ryegrass in the wintertime to keep it green all year round. And so she came into the house and I looked at her belly and all of her skin was excoriated and bleeding. And I was like, what happened? So I clean it and it just was nasty. And then I started looking at her coat and she had lost like little chunks of her hair and it was all like this waxy yellowish stuff coming off of her skin. And I was like, and she would lose like little chunks and then it would be like a little bald spot and it was all like just, so I freaked right away. Being a nurse, I was like, oh my God, she's got ringworm. So I basically haul her to the vet and I'm like, what's going on? So they do some skin tests. They're like, no, it's not ringworm, but she's got some pretty bad allergies. And I was like, okay. So right away, usually prednisone, she was on and that helped it. But we know she can't stay on that forever.
Right.
And I just assumed, because I'm an idiot, I assumed that it was a grain allergy. So I took all the grain out. Didn't even think for 1 second she'd have a protein allergy. Then she had another flare probably within a month and a half of that. That was even worse. Now her feet, the whole back of her feet were red and had no hair on it at all. And her belly was just a mess and even worse than it was before. So after that, my veterinarian recommended that I get her allergy tested.
Mm-hmm.
I saw an allergist. Basically, the woman went missing in action, moved to California, and I never got any answers as to what allergies she had and if she had any.
Oh gosh.
So I went back to my veterinarian and she goes, well, we can do the blood test. And I said, well, if I'm going to spend the money, I said, I want her tested for everything, protein, everything. Mm-hmm. So they did. And I actually found it not that bad for $480. I felt that it was well worth my investment because I don't want to keep
an answer to the problem she's
yeah.
had.
Right. So basically I got the results 2 weeks later to find out she was allergic to turkey, chicken, fish, brewer's yeast, rye grass, fiscu grass, Johnson grass, dust mites, and storage mites.
Wow.
So everything I was doing was wrong. I had to get rid of all of her food, all of her cookies, all of her treats, and wash her all out. And so now I have a problem because one of the major tocopherols that they use to preserve or give vitamins in dogs is always salmon oil or some kind of fish oil.
Right.
Everything either has brewer's yeast when it comes to treats. Everything has got chicken fat for flavor. So I couldn't, there, like a lot of the bison or the buffalo or anything like that, that was a rare or kind of like a protein she could have, had that in it. Even the beef had that in it. So now I'm really in trouble. So finally I was able to get her on, I think it was called Nature's something, and it was rabbit. And so I was able to get her on rabbit, and she did extremely well. Within probably 2 months, her skin improved. Her feet were still a little on the raw side, and she kept chewing on them. And since then, we've had all of our front and backyard ripped up, so we have zoysia grass now. So in my yard, it's no longer a problem. But when we walk her every day, that I can't control the grasses she gets exposed to. So that's when I started looking at essential oils, because I needed to do something for her feet. And I wanted to be able to clean her feet with something that wasn't going to be dangerous if she licked it.
Right.
So I started doing my research, and, basically was able to get create a spray that I could put on a baby wipe, clean her little feet, clean her belly every time. She's a female, so she squats. Clean her belly, clean her feet. After every walk, and basically within a month, all of her hair grew back in the back of her feet.
Awesome.
So then for some reason, Australia ran out of rabbit, and I couldn't get rabbit anymore. So I've started right back to the drawing board.
Oh no.
And then I ended up starting her on Signature Kangaroo, and that is what she was on forever and ever and ever, because I couldn't find anything that didn't have something she was allergic to in it. Her only treats that she gets is jerky, because I can't, and the jerky that I buy is extremely expensive, because to find jerky that's got nothing in it is not cheap, or you're buying a dehydrator and doing it yourself, which would be great if I didn't have a job. So, and, pretty much she was very stable. She is on allergy serum that she gets once a week. That helps with the storage mites, the dust mites, and the grass allergies, because those are things I cannot control, but I can control her nutrition. So, that's, how I got, to where I was. And then probably about 2 years ago, I started looking at raw, because a couple of my friends had a lot of issues with their dogs, even buying kibble food. And so I was like, okay, I'll look into it. Got into this site doing raw, but it was extremely overwhelming. So I took this 1-week course, and it was a lot of, giving your dogs bone and chicken feet, and, doing the ratios of, organ meat with protein meat, and then like having to worry about the calcium. And I was just like, I can't, this is ridiculous. I'm like, I'm a nurse, but I'm like, I'm not going to sit there and take a chance on my dog trying to worry about that I've got the right ratio right, and I do something like put her into, renal failure or liver failure, or make her even worse than she already was. And she was already stable. She had been stable for years. And I'm like, am I really going to throw this boomerang in and take a chance and make her worse than, now that she's, doing great?
Yeah.
And then I kept reading into it, and keep, seeing all the, issues with kibble food. And, my husband and I were like, my husband's like, I don't want her to eat this garbage anymore. And I'm like, yeah, but are you willing to give her, and that's the other issue too. So I can't give her chicken bone. So I'm like, are you comfortable giving her a rib bone and letting her chew a rib bone? He's like, no. I'm like, well, so I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I said, do you want to go get another supplementary freezer and start, carving up deer and carving up, all this protein? And he goes, well, there's got to be companies that do it. And I'm like, oh, they do it. And here's the price. And it was going to cost us about $450 a month just for one dog.
Wow.
To get it already ground. So your bone meal, everything is already in there. And then you got to worry about changing proteins and, checking their poop and making sure that it's like, I was like, okay, you know what? No.
Yeah.
So I had already heard about Volhard, because I know people that are on it. And then when I looked into it and I saw the brewer's yeast initially, I was like, well, there you go. So now I'm stuck again. So I'm like, I would have transitioned to her to raw much earlier. but I couldn't because of the brewer's yeast,
Mm.
which I mean is something good for dogs, but not good for her.
Right.
So,
Exactly.
and it's in a lot of dogs, in a lot of dog, even treats. Brewer's yeast
Mhm.
is in everything. Um, so yeah, so that's when finally come Christmas time, my husband had been watching on something on TV, and it was talking about Chinese medicine and nutrition and dogs and everything that's made out of kibble. And then he was like, that's it. We got to figure something out. We got to get her off of this crap. And I'm like, well, I already told you what the options were. He goes, I don't care what it costs. Let's just do it. I was like, okay. And then that's when I reached out to you again, because I was like, is there not an option? What's our option? And then you're like, well, we've got this rescue. And I was like,
Yeah.
yay. And then basically, started the liver cleanse and got her on it. And Bumble's already healthy and doing well. So I figured, well, if it's good for your sister, it's good for you, because they both eat the same thing anyway. So,
Mhm.
he's got skin issues that's from when he was initially sick. But other than that, he's outside of, horrendous heartworm treatment that he's not had to have once, but twice. Um, you know, uh, got him from Merritt Pit Bull, and he was very sick, a stray, very grossly underweight, severe skin issues, but as sweet as could be, quite sick with heartworm. Had to get him healthy enough to get heartworm treatment.
Mhm.
Got him the heartworm treatment. He did the initial old protocol, and so we waited, but he, wasn't very active. Of course, having to keep him, restricted activity.
When you say
Uh,
the old protocol, you mean the series of injections?
yes, yeah. So there was an old protocol where the doxycycline, the amount and how long you were on doxycycline and prednisone was different
Mhm.
than the protocol is now.
Right.
So that you can prepare them to get the actual heartworm treatment.
Right.
So he had his heartworm treatment. He was really, really sick. Dropped like another 6 pounds. So I rescued him. He was 45. I got him up to about 52 to drop back down to like 4. I mean, he was so sick. There were times I lied on the floor and cried because I wasn't sure if he was even going to make it through,
Mm.
because he was just so sick. But he came through because he's a pit bull and he's a survivor. He came through and did really, really well. Not all of his skin has grown back, and I think that's just scar tissue because
Yeah.
those follicles are damaged, but a
Right.
good portion of it is back. But he's done very well with the raw, but I think the difference was doing the liver cleanse for him, because he was literally on doxy and prednisone. You're looking at probably for 3 or 4 months. They initially, when he was at the vet, had him on trazodone because he was just barking all the time
Mhm.
because he was isolated, and he's a social dog. He likes to be with other dogs, so they had him on trazodone. And then, getting the heartworm treatment, and then being on prednisone after that for like, I don't know, another 6 or 8 weeks. And then to be tested again and come back positive again because there was a problem with the batch of medication that he had received.
Lord.
So he had to have it on, he had to do it all over again. And then, but this time they didn't do the one initial shot and then 2 initial shots. They did the longer doxy, they did the longer steroids, and then did the back-to-back shots. But
Mm.
now he was going in much heavier this time. So the
Mhm.
amount that he received was even more of the heartworm treatment. So, but he bounced back from it much better the second time around because he was going in healthier this time.
That's good.
But you're looking at steroids again, you're looking at antibiotics again, and it was like, good night. Like this dog has had more in his system than anything I've ever seen. But now, I mean, he's all weaned off of everything. He hasn't, he doesn't know on anything, but, and he's heartworm negative, thank goodness. But, that's pretty much the story of my 2 monkeys.
Yeah. So going back to Kalie, I know when you first contacted me about switching to the diets, you were extremely nervous about moving.
Hmm.
And in fact, even though your husband said figure something out, he didn't want it to be raw. So
Yeah.
talk about that a little bit.
I just think because, well, my husband, bless his heart, kind of grew up with toy poodles. So until before meeting me, I always said he's never had a real dog, like a big dog. So, you know, he had a learning curve in general when it comes to dogs. And when we first dated, we had ex-racing greyhounds. And ex-racing greyhounds are fed raw, and they are fed 4D meat. But their teeth are horrendous when they come out of it because they're not chewing anything else. And they're full of worms, and they're gross. They have to be dewormed. Their teeth have to be scaled because, I mean, you can't even see. You can only see maybe the tips of their canines because their teeth are so caked. And so my husband's like, well, you remember the dogs were on raw meat and look at what their teeth looked like. And remember all the worms? They had worms for months. And I was like, yeah, but that's, you know what I mean? This is a track who doesn't care about animal welfare. You know what I mean?
Right.
This is different. You know what I mean? And so, you know, I'd given him articles about, you know, how they can digest it better than kibble. And I think it just took Bumble to puke one more time and to see all the kibble come out. And he was like, well, wait a minute. He goes, he ate yesterday at 7. He goes, it's 2 p.m. He was like, what, why, look, and the volume he had was what he'd had for breakfast and the night before. And I'm like, that's because he didn't digest anything from last night either.
That's right.
And I'm like, do you understand? I said, they don't digest. And they were both just so gassy. And I'm like, I think we've got nothing to lose but to try. And so, but I think it was just the fear of, oh, they're going to get full of worms. And, you know, how could they eat raw meat? And they're not going to like it because Kalie is, I will admit, a diva. I mean, she knows the difference between dropping a carrot and a piece of cheese on the floor. Where Bumble eats carrots, blueberries, strawberries, watermelon. Kalie looks at it like you've giving her poison. She will not eat. So he's like, she's not going to eat raw meat. She's never going to eat raw meat. And I'm like, well, how do you know that until you try it? So, I mean, even on the liver cleanse, like, I mean, that dog had no idea she was eating zucchini and beans. It's like, you know, I was worried she would get fat from the potatoes, and she did not. So, I mean, it was a learning curve for both of us, but Randy was definitely afraid of doing the whole raw thing and that they would get sick from eating raw meat. But when he saw how much they loved it, he was like, oh, and then he sees, oh, you know what? He goes, I think it was last night. He said to me, I can't remember the last time Bumble farted. And I looked at him and I was like, what? It's like, that's a weird thing to mention. He goes, but seriously, he goes, do you remember how much gas he used to have? Like all the time.
Right.
And I was like, you're right. I'm like, it is. It's been ever since. He goes, I'm telling you, since February. He goes, he's just not gassy anymore. And burpy too. He used to like belch. Like, I mean, he still has the occasional burping, but you know, and he always had a bad digestive tract. Kalie never gets GI issues. You can change food with her and she will never get diarrhea, and she will never get sick from changes in proteins or food. Bumble, you change one little thing and he's got the runs. So I've got 2 very completely different dogs in that sense. But yeah, I think we were both nervous to start raw just because, first of all, you know, you hear all the horror stories. How many horror stories did I see on that raw group that I was following? You know, dogs having emergency surgery because they had a bone that they didn't digest and it perforated their GI tract. How many of them had hemorrhagic diarrhea? How many of them went into like acute liver failure and died within 48 hours? And on that, you know,
that'll scare you.
It absolutely will scare you. But then, you know, you're looking at groups that, you know, this one particular group, now I just follow it because I find it just fascinating. You know, if there's a dead deer on the road, they throw it in the back of the trunk of their car, and then they come home and they butcher it and they feed the entire head or the entire leg to their dog to eat. And Randy was like, there's no way that is happening while I'm alive on this earth. So that's, you know, so you have 2 different scenarios. So when we started doing raw with you, he couldn't get that out of his head. He was like, okay, so am I gonna have to like give her a chicken head? I'm like, no, she's not eating chicken heads. She's not eating like duck feet.
Yeah,
we're
no,
not doing
going
any
to
of
the
this.
grocery and buying food is gonna.
Right. I said we're going to buy some minced meat, and he's like, okay, just like what we eat. I was like, what we eat. He's like, okay, I think I could do that. I think I'm okay with it. So he definitely came to it, but now when he sees how much better they are, he's like, we should have done it earlier. I'm like, well, at that point we didn't have an option for Kalie because there was nothing that didn't have brewer's yeast in it.
Yeah.
So, but
So
now that there is.
you had her on a protein that was kangaroo
Yep.
before you switched into the rescue raw. And she was doing well on that food, but have you seen an advancement still in the switch to raw?
Yeah, I definitely, well, for a dog who's 11 years old, I'm still convinced she acts like she's 2.
Mm-hmm.
She's very, very active. So she is much trimmer. Her coat, I mean, she is a yellow lab. So, I mean, she is dusting hair all over my house anyways. So she's always shed quite a bit, but her coat is softer and shinier. Her breath, that was the biggest. So when we did the cleanse, both of them got greasy and they got smelly. Like they reeked like they had been living under a grease pan for a month. Like they were, Kalie just all the way down her back was like a 14-year-old boy that hasn't showered in a week. Like,
That's
like
disgusting.
it was gross because labs can be very oily.
Yeah.
You know, usually yellow labs are not that bad, but she was disgusting. And Bumble's feet, in between his feet, got really yeasty and they were sticky. Like I would just be like, oh, like, and their breath was horrendous. Like they could clear a room. I was like, oh, what is happening here? Like,
Yeah.
what is happening here? But then after the cleanse and starting the raw, Kalie can wash my face. She's got beautiful breath. And for a dog who doesn't like to chew, like Bumble likes to chew his Nyla bones, he likes to chew, you know, Kalie will eat lamb ears and that's the extent of her chewing.
Mm-hmm.
But Bumble loves to chew. You give him a big stick of wood and he'll just gnaw on that thing. So he's got beautiful teeth. And Kalie, for 11 years old, my vet is very impressed with how her teeth look. And I find that her breath is much better having been on raw than being on kibble, which, let's be honest, she wasn't even really chewing it anyway.
Right. So they both went through a bit of a detox period.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Which can be scary because I know a lot of people, when I've had a couple of clients, they see these dramatic changes that look awful, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh my God, it's the food causing the problem. Well, no, the food is helping the body release all that it's been holding on to. And that's hard for some people to wrap their minds around.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was probably the first 2 weeks or maybe 3 weeks into the cleanse that was the worst.
Yeah.
And then it flipped. Then all of a sudden they stopped getting greasy. They stopped. And I was like, okay, are we finally over the hump that I can finally wash you guys? Because you're disgusting.
Yeah.
So I gave them both nice baths. And even Bumble's feet were no longer sticky and smelled like, it smelled like yeast, like bread yeast.
Mm-hmm.
And he no longer had sticky, gross feet. But yeah, I mean, and he was doing really, really good.
Awesome.
And he wasn't itchy, not having, but yeah, they both really got gross the first 3 weeks. And now that they've been on Volhard, they are doing great and they love it. They absolutely love it. They can't wait. Like they're chirping at the bit. I cannot be later than 7 o'clock because it's hell to pay. It's just like, they're like, look, lady, I had to titrate it a bit because initially I followed what the weight requirement for the amount of food was. And so then one lost weight and the other one got fat.
Right.
So then I had to change it up. And then the other one got fat and the other one I was like, okay. So now it's basically titrating for what you need for your dogs. Another thing too, which initially worried me, but now I seem to be okay with it. Kalie used to drink a lot of water and so did Bumble. Like, I mean, drink like they've never seen water in their life. And Bumble, I literally basically am holding a bowl in front of his face. I'm like, I need you to drink water because you haven't drank any water. He's not drinking barely any water, which initially freaked me out.
Yeah.
But Kalie drinks, but not as much as she used to. But Bumble drinks water when he needs it.
Yeah.
But he used to drink the water bowl dry, like 3 times a day, 4 times a day. Now he drinks maybe once or twice a day, and he's fine with it. His urine is normal.
Yeah.
But I mean, and the water is in his Volhard as well, but
that's
he's not
the
drinking
key.
half the
You're
water.
feeding a food that is moist. It's
Yep.
hydrated. And depending on how much moisture you put in the bowl, like some people make their Volhard almost soupy. So if they're taking in water while they're eating, then that's better for the digestive system. But my dogs are the same way. They don't take in a lot from a water bowl. It's mostly in their food. But I'll just use this as a talking point. When we feed kibble, it goes in dry. And so the body actually has to pull moisture from organs, whether it's the skin or the heart or the kidneys or the wherever, to get it into the digestive system to begin breaking down that kibble. And that's part of why that process you talked about, throwing up kibble from 2 days later, that's why that takes so long, So I even tell people, if you're still feeding kibble, put a little moisture in it.
Yep. Which is what I used to do. I used to give her her food, and I would do probably a tablespoon of wet food and some water with the kibble. So her kibble was always moist. I never gave her dry kibbles, and she was still drinking like ridiculous amounts of water. Like I was having to fill her bowl all the time. It was ridiculous. And I was just like, is there something wrong? Are you getting like a urinary tract infection? Like what's happening? And she just used to drink constantly. So, but now she just drinks more in the morning because she sleeps throughout the night. And so if she kind of gets up and she's like, until she goes and she got morning muck mouth. Yeah. And then she'll drink a lot of water. And then we go for our walk. She eats her breakfast. She kind of drinks a little bit more. And then that's pretty much the end of it for the day. So it's been a huge difference about how much water they're taking in.
Yeah. So thinking about Kalie, I think you said she was about 3 when the allergies first started presenting themselves.
Yeah.
Can you look back and is there any correlation or any guesswork even to what may have been the origin of those allergies?
I definitely want to say it was probably the grass that was the catalyst for it, because she loves to roll in grass. She walks on everybody's lawn all the time. So I think that started it. But I was feeding her chicken or turkey based food, and I was giving her turkey jerky. I was giving her treats that had chicken fat in it. I was giving her fish oil. So I was basically throwing all the stuff at her that she was allergic to and didn't know she was. So I just think it just went full circle at one point. She just had it all in her system. And that's why my veterinarian's like, you're going to need to wash her out of all of this. And it might get worse before it gets better, but it's going to take a couple of months to wash her out. And I mean, I feel horrible because I'm like, I basically have been making my dog 100 times worse, giving her food that was grain free because I thought she had a grain allergy because, well, isn't that what all dogs have? To giving her everything, chicken, fish. I mean, I was giving her everything that she, I was feeding her salmon. Like I was, and now when I think about all of the allergies she had, I was just like, and I mean, I've learned a lot from her. I've learned I always read my own food and what's in it. Because I'm a very healthy person, but I never thought having to read what was in my dog food was so important. And I mean, I would stand at Aunt Carrie's and read every single label, because by the time you get down to the second to last sentence, there came the fish oil, or there came the chicken fat, or there came something she was allergic to. And I was just like, okay, well, we're just going to put that back. So, I mean, her variety in food was virtually nothing because half of the stuff had stuff she couldn't have.
Yeah.
So, but I think it was a combination of the grasses, and it was a combination of me feeding her all the stuff she was allergic to, thinking I was doing the right thing, giving her fish oil and
we don't know
giving her all of that.
right? We don't know
Yeah,
what we don't know. And,
yeah,
until you really dive into this, because you're forced to in some cases, you didn't even know a protein allergy was possible.
no, I think my veterinarian was totally taken back. She was just like, I've never seen a dog have an allergy to fish. She's like, chicken, turkey, I totally could see that. She goes, I've even seen some dogs allergic to beef. She goes, but fish? She goes, this one is a new one for me. So I think that's when it became challenging for me for an omega fatty acid for her, to make sure that her coat stays healthy and that her joints stay healthy. Because I couldn't find an omega fatty acid that wasn't fish.
Mm-hmm.
A complete nightmare. Um, now I've got the canine omega that I get from you, but initially I was getting her an omega fatty acid from the UK because it was the only place that sold a vegetarian omega fatty acid for her.
Right.
And I would have it shipped here. Um, I had no choice. It was the only one that I could find.
Yeah.
So,
And now we know that like safflower oil is also a possibility.
yep,
There are others.
that's what she was on.
Yeah.
It was a safflower oil.
Yeah.
And also had black seed oil or black seed, I think, was also in it. It was all kinds of all natural.
And the canine
Different,
omega is camelina oil.
right.
Yeah.
Right. And she loves it. They love it. And I give it to Bumble too, because I alternate it between he can have fish oil. So.
Sure. Yeah. And my dogs, if you give one something, the other one's like, where's mine?
Yeah, exactly.
I got something I didn't. Are you doing anything different for her now, moving forward in her senior years, or her vaccine schedule, or products that you use with her or don't use with her?
Not really, because she is doing really well. She has annual blood work, senior panels done every year. And she's got a panel of a 5-year-old dog. She's doing extremely well. She does have, I guess must have gotten exposed to a tick-borne disease at one point, so they monitor that. But for the most part, no. I mean, outside of the omega acids, I'm not giving her additional joint supplementation because she's doing really well at this point. And even at that, if I were to give her a joint supplementation, I can't give her glucosaminochondroitin because it's marine based. I had her on many years ago a stuff called Nupro, which I really liked, but it uses shark cartilage. So I just couldn't, and that was supposed to be for hips and joint as well. So, I mean, I do give her, she likes cottage cheese. So sometimes I give her a little bit of cottage cheese. Like I'll make it fancy, I put her food and I put the dollop of cottage cheese in the middle. So it kind of looks like a fancy French dish. But she absolutely loves it. So I use that as sort of extra calcium for her.
Yeah.
But for now, I mean, I haven't had to do anything additional as of yet.
Okay.
Where Bumble, on the other hand, he's already got some hip dysplasia and some arthritis, so his protocol is a little bit different than hers. But in Kalie's case, I'm not doing anything extra. She gets her vaccines on schedule, so I mean, she gets her rabies, her distemper. What else does she get?
Well, parvo distempers together.
Yeah.
You would only do Bordetella if you're boarding her.
Yeah, no, she doesn't do Bordetella anymore. She doesn't get boarded. But she used to go to a groomer and get groomed. But I do it here now. She just gets too anxious, especially at some of these groomers, like this, especially the small dogs that are barking and yipping. It makes her very stressed. So I started, I throw a peanut butter party and I put peanut butter all along the edge of the bathtub and just wash her that way. And so she doesn't need to have her Bordetella done anymore. I still am doing limes because of where I live. We have a very high deer population here. So I still do lime, but probably as she gets a little bit older, I won't have to do that anymore. But while she's still rolling in the grass, and I have deer right outside my fence, I figured I'd rather be, and she has tick-borne, she's, positive. So I figured I want to just, for now until otherwise, But besides that, I'm not giving her. She gets her heartworm medication, you know, her basic stuff. I mean, she gets her serum, her allergy serum every week. But yeah, I mean, she's healthier than anything else could be. I mean, for an 11-year-old dog, my veterinarian just can't believe it.
That's
She's
awesome.
like, she's very muscular too, because she's very active. So she can run across this half-acre yard, you know, with Bumble barely trailing behind, because she's that active. She's very muscular. She's got good muscle tone. She's not overweight, considering she's a lab. That is always a concern. But no, she's, you know, I don't have to do anything extra. I just give her the omegas, and she's doing really, really well with that. I did want to do something extra for her hips, just as more of a prophylaxis, but I can't find anything that doesn't have fish in it.
What about like golden paste, the turmeric based
Yeah,
additive?
that's probably, add that to her food probably.
I mean, it's a spice. I mean, I certainly don't think she's going to be allergic to that. And you
No.
coconut oil and black pepper, so I think
she loves coconut oil.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, she loves coconut oil.
My dogs get golden paste in their meal every day. So consider that as just something supportive, right?
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Anything else you would like to add or share, or give some food for thoughts to the dog mamas out there that are maybe struggling with similar issues, or the fear of change?
Yeah, I think when you have a dog that has got allergies and you're trying to figure out what's wrong, it's a very frustrating thing, because we all know dogs don't talk, right? So you have to go on trying to read what's wrong, and you look at them and you're like, what's wrong? And they're just like, there's something wrong, and there's something isn't right, and you want to do everything. And there's just so much information out there, and it's so overwhelming. And I think the initial mistake I made was, trying to just do it all myself. I'm like, I could take these classes and I can figure this out, and I can just listen to these people. There's my husband. And I could probably just do this. And it was extremely overwhelming. And so what I did was just back up my bus and just quit. And then that's when I was like, I need to do something, because it's in their best interest. So I put my fear in my back pocket, and I contacted someone who knew what they were talking about. And that was you. So, at least I was lucky that I was able to find someone that, I've already had a lot of friends, and even people within the rescue that use your services. So I felt confident. They were like, I went through it too. Yeah, my dog got greasy and smelly, and oh yeah, I went through it. I'm like, okay, cool. So I had a support system, and then I had you, who was always available. I could email you 150 times and be like, I don't know what I'm doing.
I still laugh at the day that Angela was here at my house. You were texting her because you didn't want to text me.
I'm like, Angela, she's going to think I'm an idiot. I'm like, just tell me, is this a cup? Is it a quarter of a cup? How many beans is that? I'm like, why is this? I said, I can't wrap my head around this. And so Angela's like, it's okay, because she had gone, and I mean, even Gouda, when I first met Angela and Gouda, before I started volunteering with them, Gouda was the exact same presentation as Kalie. She had no hair on the back of her feet. Mm-hmm. That poor dog, and her ears were fire engine red. And I felt for her. She was, and I think on pale dogs, it looks even angrier. Oh my gosh. And I was like, oh, my dog looks exactly like your dog. And she was like, oh my God, these allergies are such a nightmare. And it was like,
Gouda was on fire.
Oh, she was on. Oh yeah. And Kalie was in pretty much the same rough shape. Yeah. So I was kind of, and so many of them went on to Volhard, and I was saying, they were like, you should do it. I'm like, she's allergic to brewer's yeast. I can't, you know what I mean? I said, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so when I went to these other raw groups, my husband's like, no, we're not feeding her duck feet. It's not happening. I'm like, okay. And he would see the pictures of feet and bones, and then a chicken head and a raw egg. And he was like, there's no way Kalie is going to eat that stuff. And I was like, you're probably right. And he's like, I'm not opening up a butcher in my garage, cutting up animal carcass. So this was that. I think that's what intimidated me about raw. When you hear the word raw, you're like, okay. And they're like, yeah, give them this, give them that. You need to make sure they got enough calcium, so you got to give them eggshells, and you can grind it, and don't forget to do bone broth. And you need to do your berries and your fruit, and you got to make sure you got fiber. And I'm like, oh, I was like, what? I was like, it was way more chemistry than I ever thought. I'm like, what just happened to, like, 4 ounces of meat, some, it became way more complicated than it had to be.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how to do it yourself. But I would definitely, if you have a dog that has allergies, and the food industry is only getting worse. It's getting worse for people, and it's getting worse for animals. And that's nothing to say about the actual animals themselves. It's got to do with the processing plants and animals are not a priority when it comes to nutrition. And so E. coli and salmonella and all of these things are ending up in a lot of these foods because of just lousy food processing.
Yeah.
And also using, sick animals to make that food. And ultimately, when you think about it, you're like, I wouldn't eat it. Why am I feeding this to my dog?
Right.
And then when you realize, then the other thing people worry about, I think, with raw is they worry about the cost, because it can be and start to be, when you look at these raw groups, which if anyone wants to go into raw, don't make my mistake. Don't go to these raw feeding groups. Don't join them on Facebook. Don't. It's gonna completely freak you out. You're gonna get shell shocked, and you're gonna get completely overwhelmed. And there are extremists. There's people that believe in the paleo, and they believe in giving their dogs whole carcass. And then you've got other ones that are making bone broth for 2 days. They are extremists. There are some that are extremists, and I think you see that everywhere. But that would be my advice. Number one, don't do that, and just seek consult with someone who knows, like yourself, where you're more well-rounded, where you're not only doing raw, but you're doing Chinese medicine-based therapy, and you're also doing essential oil therapy, which I've been using essential oils on my dogs for a long time. And I think that it's important you find someone who knows what they're talking about and listen to their advice. And then once you start feeling comfortable, your confidence is there. And when you start seeing how well your dog is doing, how healthy and happy they are, then you'll realize it was all worth it. It was all worth it. And seeing how great my dogs are, and these little rotten boogers out here, it's definitely worth it. So yes, it's nerve-wracking at the beginning. You're very worried about changing or going to something that we're so used to. We give them a cup of kibble, we put some stuff in it. And that's why I think I got overwhelmed when I was doing the liver cleanse. The proportions and the amount, and I was like, the math of it, I was like, oh. But then once I got the hang of it, then I rolled with it, and then I was no longer afraid of it. So I think that, having Angela going through it, and even Robin going through it, and so many of them, that I'm like, I had a support group right there. So it was very helpful. But I think you were the most, supportive. You didn't think I was crazy. I think that it is scary to go raw. It is scary because there's a lot of misinformation out there. But I think that's, as a nurse, I'm used to, people who come to me all the time with misinformation, and I'm like, well, where did you find that? Dr. Google again? Good for you. So that's right. So, that would be my advice to people, is that it's fine to do your research and to look into it. But before you make the leap with someone who can support you and who can be there to give you the right information, and get you the supplies and get you what you need, and tell you if you have a question that's like, oh, you know what, can they change from this protein to that protein? You don't have to worry about going to a book. You have someone that you can just email or text or whatever and say, look, is it okay? Or when my dogs got greasy and smelly, I'm like, is that normal? It was nice to know than trying to do something yourself and being overwhelmed and then quitting. You don't want to quit. Once you start and you start seeing the change in them, you don't want to quit because they're doing so well now.
Right.
And I think the other thing too, even when I take Kalie to the veterinarian now, and they're like, oh, what is she on? And I'm like, she's on Volhard. And I said, and she's on raw. And of course you'll get and I prepared, you know what I mean? Because I'm prepared. So, but I haven't had any issues with any of it. They're all like, okay, well, just make sure she gets, this and she gets that. And I'm like, oh, she's getting everything that she needs. And I will always bring a printout of everything that she's eating and the foods and everything she's on. And I give it to them. And I'm like, here you go. You can put it in her file. And of course, in red bold on her file, it's like, mother is a nurse. So
I thought you were going to say something else. Mother is
no, mother is a nurse. So I guess they feel that they can just talk to me honestly or frankly and not have to, sugarcoat anything. But I mean, I think she was the one I was worried about because she's older. She's the one that's got legitimate allergies.
Yeah.
But I mean,
she's the reason you called, and then you were like, well, Bumble's going to do this too then, So, yeah.
Well, that's it. I mean, he's got nothing to lose, by being on better nutrition. He's younger than her, so he's going to be 5. So, and she's 11. So by starting him now is going to prevent illnesses from poor nutrition later on.
Awesome.
So it's a win-win for both of them for sure.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate your time very, very much. And I am glad to hear both dogs are doing well and that Kalie is really thriving on this. And that you and your husband both have become happy with this decision. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Where there's no turning back now. We're very, very happy. And it's very easy to do, it's super easy. I'm not in there chopping up meat,
Right.
Initially with COVID, it was hard to find beef, but now it's not a problem anymore. So, but now, I mean, they're doing great. They love it. They absolutely love it.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I appreciate your time. I am stopped.